As a result of the Germans defeating the Soviets at the Battle of Rezene, June 23rd through the 27th of 1941, a lone Soviet KV tank took a courageous stand against the whole German Kampfer group by keeping the Kampfergruppen stuck at a crossroad for one whole night and day. This remarkably defiant stand delayed a crucial German advancement in Operation Barbarossa, which resulted in the Soviets forming the Baltic Soviet Defense Operation, which in turn eventually resulted in the finalization of Nazi Germany's persistent offensive. In 1939, Germany started World War II by invading Poland. This was a surprise to most of the world, and it sparked lots of anger and confusion between countries. Germany had the advantage of surprise, which is more than valuable. They were able to take over Poland entirely, which gave them new ground in the upcoming war within a couple of weeks. Also in 1939, Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia met to sign a non-aggression pact. This pact clearly stated that neither Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia would invade each other within 10 years of the signing of the contract. Germany broke this pact as just 2 years later the Soviet Union was engaging Nazi Germany in a prodigious fight for Russia. This invasion was called Operation Barbarossa. The Germans wanted Russia because they needed a more advantageous position in the war, and it's roughly 21 times the size of Germany. Germany did this because they knew they did not want Russia as an enemy while they were starting the Second World War. They just simply couldn't, or the war would not work and they would lose rapidly. So, as a result of the non-aggression pact, Germany was safe from Soviet Russia for a maximum of 10 years. This would give Adolf Hitler a great deal of time to try and take out the enemies and have a better position against Soviet Russia on his quest for Lebensraum. Of course, Germany's supplies paled in comparison to the resources the Soviets had. This meant that Germany had to be especially smart in the way that they did things. They had to use their aircraft to their advantage and attack when the other army was least expecting it. This was the cause of many night raids and grueling multi-day battles and assaults. This was no doubt to be the greatest challenge the Soviet Union was ever involved in. The 3rd Mechanized Corps were rapidly being driven back through the small village of Rezene by the Kampfer group, and this is where the KV-2 was seen, sitting in the middle of a crossroad. Immediately, it opened fire on the Germans. This caused the Germans to fall back as they thought it was some sort of counterattack. Kampfer group, the main division that the KV-2 was fighting, was trying to recuperate, strategize, and establish a form of communication with their allies. But, as if on cue, the KV-2 knocked over a telephone pole which disconnected the Kampfer group from his fellow comrades and other battle divisions. This left just the Rouse battle division to fight the KV-2. That is, until German reinforcements would figure out something was wrong and help. The KV was fighting the Germans alone, and all the while, the KV-2 was keeping the Germans from destroying the 3rd Mechanized Corps. During the time that the Germans were fighting the KV-2, the 3rd Mechanized Corps had fallen back almost 9 kilometers to the small town of Bedanci. The 3rd Mechanized Corps immediately got supplies and started to find out how they can counter the Blitzkrieg strategy and how to stop their rapid advance. All throughout the first night, the Germans and the crew inside the KV-2 battled. The Germans tried to send in bombers, as in people armed with explosives, to destroy the gun and hopefully immobilize the KV. This succeeded in immobilizing it, but it was in such an advantageous position that it didn't really matter. The Germans couldn't drive by it without the KV-2 turning its turret and destroying them with a single shot. This continued on throughout morning. As General Ross describes it, the battle was grueling. We were making no progress, and the KV seemed to have an infinite amount of ammo. Around nightfall, we changed our tactics completely. We started to send in bombers that would try and destroy the tracks and guns of the KV tank. This was to no avail, mainly because the KV tank had machine gunners that would spray the surrounding area every couple of minutes. One lucky soldier, who was completely barefoot, managed to plant an explosive on the gun. When I asked him how he had become shoeless, he told me, "I was waiting in the ditch with a couple of other soldiers and we decided to take our boots off so that we would be able to run our full speed. So, once we had all gotten our bombs, we crept out of the ditch to plant them on the KV. I planted mine on the gun as I was hoping to destroy it, but the charge went off and the gun stayed intact." As a result of this brave, shoeless German, the KV-2 could no longer fire with the accuracy that it once could. The shots were reported to have gone left each time that it fired. This caused the crew to miss several shots that would have proved invaluable if they had landed. but soon the KV crew figured out what was wrong with the gun and started to work with it. To quote General Ross, "We used the damaged gun to our advantage. We started to attack from the right of the tank. This was helpful for a short while as the KV tank started to get the hang of its damaged gun. It fired 2 shots, destroying one of our 88mm artillery pieces that we were using to drive around to a blind spot at its flank. And it also destroyed a supply truck that we were using to feed and water our starving soldiers." Around noon, the second day, the KV-2 had to have a whole operation launched against it as it was holding up the supply truck line and a great deal of the German forces. As all battle divisions started to launch a full-scale attack upon the lone KV-2, the crew inside the KV-2 was punished more by the deafening sound of bullets hitting metal. This continued on for several hours, in which the Germans were becoming ever more frustrated. They eventually managed to drive an 88mm howitzer behind the KV-2. It fired a single shot which stopped the KV tank's turret. After about an hour of the KV-2 sitting still, the Germans finally mustered up the courage to go look at the KV. As the Germans were walking forward to inspect the KV, amazed by the fact that a tank could delay the German forces for a whole day, the turret moved again and shot a Panzer 38T scout tank and destroyed it. In the midst of all the confusion and panic, a German managed to push a grenade through the hole that the 88mm bullet shell had caused. When the grenade exploded, the tank's turret stopped moving and the lid on top of the tank's turret blew off. The wary Germans now came to inspect the KV tank again. This time, they looked inside the commander's hatch of the KV and found the dead crew inside. Out of complete respect, the Germans buried the crew in a nearby field. It was estimated by General Ross himself that over the course of this KV tank's one-day stand against the Germans, it destroyed 6 supply trucks, 8 55mm artilleries, 6 88mm artilleries, 13 PZKP FW-38Ts, and killed over 22 German bombers. While the KV-2 was fighting off the Germans by itself, the 3rd Mechanized Corps retreated back to the town of Bedensai. This allowed the Soviets time, and this is what they needed most. So, overall, the KV-2 saved thousands of lives by delaying the Germans. The whole 3rd Mechanized Corps would have surely perished. At this small town, they were able to analyze the blitzkrieg strategy that the German forces were using and create their own counter-strategy. This counter-strategy is called the Baltic Soviet Defense Strategy, or the BSDO. The strategy was designed to counter German blitzkrieg tactics. They would have a group of 6 or so tanks set up on a firing position facing towards the enemy. Then there were 3 or 4 tanks protecting the flanks of the firing squad. This slowed the Germans' advance through Lithuania by quite a prodigious amount. The battle started to last much longer and the Soviets started to win. The Germans, on the other hand, were having trouble coming up with a counter to the BSDO. For one, they didn't have enough time, as the Soviets were very persistent, and 2, they had not the supplies that would counter this strategy. The BSDO was the main strategy used to counter Nazi Germany in tank warfare, and as a result of its fluentness, the Germans were driven back throughout Lithuania, although they did manage to get to Russia's border. Since they had no time to think of a counter-strategy, they were forced to fight a 2-front war in Germany. This ultimately led to the finalization of Nazi Germany's offensive on the Baltic front and the end of Operation Barbarossa.